Hey everybody. It's evening here and it'll be getting dark soon, so probably a relatively brief little walk and talk today. There's a number of things on my mind, but I think the one that I'm most interested in pursuing is oh wow. Just noticing some new signage here. So, in my previous discussion, I was orbiting a topic that it's very important to me. And I think I understood it intuitively throughout my life, particularly in my childhood, when I first got to go to school. And there's lots of good reasons to be angry about what happens to children in schools. There's some terrible things that happen there. Essentially, much of what happens looks to me, from one perspective, a lot like cognitive and relational circumcision, right? Amputation of faculties and abilities and relational urgencies. And there are many other perspectives to look at schooling from. Where nothing like it is available in the modern world, often various other kinds of slavery ensue. And considering the incredible wealth of representational knowledge that's available to us now, dangerous though that may be, much of it is, we wouldn't want to be without it either. We wouldn't want to be entirely deprived of it. In any case, when I first got to go to school, I realized, or at least in thinking about that experience, so in seeing it in hindsight later in life, I don't know that I realized it, I probably didn't realize it consciously as a child, though I think my mother was very aware of it. And perhaps my father, but in a weirder way and to a lesser degree. I saw the Cooper's Hawk come a little while ago, but it was just on patrol. Give me a moment, I need to say hello to one of my vegetal friends here. So at least in thinking back on what I experienced when I first went to school, so I'm talking about kindergarten, and I'm also talking about circa, let's see, probably circa 67, 68, 68, 69, in Sacramento, California. I used to know the name of the school, but I can't recall it at the moment, though I remember my kindergarten teacher's name, Mrs. Rounds. There was a weird thing going on where an attempt at something like normalization of the children was happening, and of course this is part of the idea of behind circumcision. And each of the children brought to their human birth and incarnation an array of incredibly unique gifts, and many of those gifts were subtle or even timid. And most of those tended to get punished, or snipped off, or other things would be rewarded so that they wouldn't develop, so their gifts wouldn't be nurtured and nourished. And my last video, which I haven't yet posted, I was talking about this topic that we bring to our human life in childhood, and some of us manage to preserve some few of these gifts, some of us a wide array, into our adulthood if we're either very lucky or very diligent or very passionate, or we have some people who protect us and who encourage us and reassure us and nurture our capacity to sort of allow these gifts to be sustained and to be fertilized and to sprout and grow and take root and so on. I know I'm using all the vegetal metaphors here. I was looking for a word I couldn't find. Now, when I was speaking about this the other day, I was speaking very generally about humans, and that's what I've been doing right now. But what I want you to understand is you personally have within you hundreds of untapped gifts and faculties that you're probably still carrying the essence, the sort of seeds of, right? And in our modern culture, so few of these are nurtured or rewarded, and in fact, much of what is nurtured and rewarded is things that kill those seeds and replace them with kind of tokenized, commodified representations of them, right? Instead of kindness or the beauty of the soul, what is rewarded is the exemplification of certain physical forms that photograph well, and that match up to the modern, bizarre derivations of sexual attractiveness or physical, what we presume, these kind of bizarre left hemispheric doll-like versions of the muscular, ripped guy, the thin hourglass girl, and so on. And these representations are a bit like contagious religions in that as we're continually immersed in them, they embed themselves in maybe not just the minds of modern people, but possibly even the genetics, right? Like we will reproduce, and some of these prototypes will possibly be embedded in our children's awareness without them having been previously exposed to it. So it's not only by exposure that these kinds of things are contagious. Some of them get embedded probably in the genome or the epigenome or both. And this is very tragic. It's part of the problem with representation, right? Representation collapses a broad array of possible, what we might think of as relational and sensorial phenotypes into very tiny, narrow exemplars that become dominant in popular conception, desire, so on and so forth. And of course, I'm affected by all these things. I don't know about them merely theoretically. They're directly part of my day-to-day experience, and I have been affected by the representation, that's sort of the tokenization of what beauty in a female is, or what attractiveness in a man is, at least in the physical, types. And that's just one example, because there are cognitive examples of the same kind of problem. You're supposed to think a certain way. There are creative examples of the same kind of problem. You're supposed to write or dance or make films a certain way. You can see how the broad, diverse potentials of our humanity get rendered down into these doll-like exemplars. I'm glad I came up with that word, or could find it. But what I really wanted to encourage you to understand today isn't the general. I want you to understand that you personally are carrying hundreds of unique ways of being human, ways of having senses that are nothing like the 5 senses that we're taught are the senses, right? Here's another problem. We're taught we have 5 senses. I could easily name 20. You have a sense of balance. You can sense your temperature, whether you're hungry or not. You have a sense of where you are in space, in time. You have a sense of location. You're oriented in your mind in a number of ways that we don't even have language about. So there are thousands of senses, and many of them would seem supernatural if we were able to experience them, even the partial development of them in our direct embodied experience. They would seem superhuman, because what we've been taught to think of as human is so limited that it would be as if, like, the physical analogy would be someone who is missing all of their limbs, including their head, and then just being called that remnant would be called, that's what human's supposed to look like. That's how it is inside of us, right? We've been scripted to imagine our humanity, our normal humanity, our proper humanity, as something so limited that it would be like seeing a bird with no limbs, right? Just a lump, just a sort of oval lump of the place where the lungs and organs are. And that is a cruel and tragic deprivation. That's what I mean by amputation and by circumcision and so on, using these very severe words, because the severity can't be overemphasized. We've lost nearly everything about what it means to be personally human. And you yourself are carrying astonishing gifts that not just your ancestors, but the entire history of life on Earth invested into you, into the peculiar vehicle, except that's really the wrong word. You're not a machine. The peculiar carrier being of your human birth and your body, even if you are deformed, even if you are disabled, even if you are, in fact, maybe more so if you are disabled, because often people who are disabled in some way, and perhaps there's some, you can call them differently abled if we want to be politically correct. I come from the 60s. I'm very concerned about language and thought and ideas, but I have a lot of grave reservations about many of the projections and inactions that fall under the aegis of political correctness. So I ask you to bear with me and allow me to speak my own language, just as I would allow you to do were we together, regardless of who you might be. Instead of telling you how to speak, I would allow you to communicate in the ways that are natural and make sense to you. And then in a separate discussion, if it was important, we might discuss problematical structures or connotations of the language. A friend of mine the other day became very upset when I used the word exotic, and I won't go into why. But I tried to explain to my friend, I said to my friend, are you sure you want to edit my vocabulary? Like, like, um, because to me that's a kind of punishment, right? Like if I'm doing something wrong and I have to be corrected. And there are so many senses of the word exotic that to presume that it's politically incorrect from the get-go and to see that as the primary or only usage of the word seems to me to be its own kind of misbehavior. Another friend of mine, I'd written a very sophisticated post about the Earth being a biorelational hyperstructure, and my friend shared my post, but then criticized me for having gendered the Earth as a she. And I was like, come on, are you serious? In any case, that's a side topic. What I want to get at is just this. The people who have lost physical abilities, or maybe blind or deaf, or have unique... See, this is the weird thing. We're each uniquely embodied. We have this idea that to be human means we're all the same thing. Well, categorically that's true, but in the actual situation it's not true. It's not. We're each in time as if we're the only human being that ever existed. We're each in time-space that way. We're each in relation that way. And the fact that you can derive qualities over groups and all of that, very useful and important, but not definitive. And we treat that as definitive when actually the uniqueness of each one of us is at least as definitive, if not more definitive. So I really want you to get in your bones what I'm trying to communicate here. You are carrying treasures more precious than the entire history of representational thought. You, personally, you are carrying things so astonishingly profound that they would wreck religion, science, fucking language, everything. You're more than all the representations could ever be, and you've always been thus, and there's no other way for you to be. Alas, however, nearly none of us will have any deep experience of this fact, though we will live our entire lives in this way, because we will live in the evacuated shell of our humanity, rather than having the opportunity to discover, literally to reveal to ourselves and to the world the staggering prodigy that is the fundamental basis of our human nature, the essence of our humanity. In every single person, it's as if 80% of our abilities and creativity and curiosity and passion and power and wonder and awe and relationships, they've all been obliterated. And what we get in return are like these sort of, candy wrapper bullshit that our cultures produce. That stuff is garbage. It's just toxic effluent. And most of us will only have that throughout all of our lives, and we will mistake that for what we're actually carrying inside and who we can actually become inside. And I'm not saying this because I've somehow managed to evade the trap. I was lucky enough or passionate enough or curious enough to, at one point in my life, have help to break through the shell, this shell-like construct thing, and see what was actually underneath it. And what was actually underneath it makes religion, makes the ideas of supernatural powers look ridiculously tedious in comparison. We have the capacity to share minds with other beings directly. We can touch the minds of stars, of worlds beyond this one. Our capacity for relation is unparalleled. There's nothing like it in any of our stories. The wildest of our stories don't compare at all to what we're actually capable of. And yet, these stories seem fantastical to us, maybe even impossible. And what I'm trying to say is, we are the impossible embodied. The whole fucking manifold of the impossible embodied. When you see examples of human prodigy, you're not seeing actual prodigy most of the time. There are exceptions. Most of the time what you're seeing is someone who managed to break one little tiny part of the shell and then and sort of develop their humanity through that hole, so to speak, that penetration. and emerge on the other side in insight, right? Emerge into insight on the other side of the shell, and then reflect that insight back into the world, like someone, for example, Einstein, or, I mean, I often give scientific examples, but there's millions of brilliant examples in every aspect of human endeavor, male and female, children and adults, I mean, every kind of human being, able-bodied and differently able-bodied. So I just want you to understand personally that you yourself are like what I'm attempting to communicate here, and that there's nothing in human culture that's worth a drop of piss compared to what you were born to become and be, experience and express. There's no representation that matters at all compared to the actual nature of the essence of our humanity. And I'm not saying that it's your obligation or something like this to discover or uncover and embody this, but it's horribly tragic that almost all of us, myself included, we will live lives that have nearly none of what we brought to our human birth and the incredibly beautiful, provocative, purposive intelligences that are essential. These are why we were born. We weren't born to fucking work at McDonald's or make videos like this one, or, you know, watch YouTube or stare at screens our whole lives. We were born for something so provocative that, in comparison to it, orgasm looks like garbage. I mean, we were born to participate in a network of anciently evolved intelligences so staggeringly brilliant and dangerously profound that we don't even have stories that resemble this, although there are a few that are kind of interesting. White Fang Goes Dingo is one I'd recommend, by Thomas Dish. There's a couple of other, like, there's a few films that imply some of these things. One of them is the film Powder. Another one is relatively uncommon but brilliant, Man Facing Southeast. K-Pax is a sort of Americanized version of something like this. And what I'm trying to say is, these films don't show us what we are. They show us 1/10,000th of what we are. But it's the 1/10,000th that mostly gets ignored and gets replaced by, you know, commercial versions of stardom and the commodification of prodigy that happens in science and technology, in performing arts, and so on and so forth. So most of us it really is as though we're in a kind of trap, right? And there's nearly no one who can stand with us. There's no cohort yet that I've found that can stand with us and encourage and nurture the true basis and purposive intelligences that underlie our existence as embodied intelligences, as human beings. And we are not merely human beings. That's the other important thing. We are so much more than human that if you're limited to thinking about our humanity, you're looking at a 10,000th of what you are. That's what I'm trying to communicate. And all of us are carrying the seeds of faculties so astonishing: the capacity to heal with the touch of a hand, the capacity to physically travel without machines, the capacity to touch other minds and participate not just with other intelligences that we have never dreamed of, but with entire networks of intelligences that there's no evidence of around here at all in our representations. The closest thing we have are things like religions, or science fiction stories, or fantasy stories. And it should be obvious that those stories come from somewhere, right? They're not pure inventions. It's not possible to purely invent something. What happens is there are intuitions, and there are forms of knowledge that seem to be forbidden around here, forms of awareness that are forbidden, and those are what get encoded in the fantastic stories, in our cartoons, in the magical stories, in stories and ideas about the supernatural, and in the kind of cultish, bizarre, and I don't want you to get trapped in the ephemera of the cultish, bizarre ideas about psychism or channeling or any of this crap, right? Almost all of that is designed for the marketplace. And nearly everything you're carrying is precisely the opposite of that. It doesn't want anything to do with being packaged and sold. It wants to be experienced as your own life, in your own life, in your own unique way, with other human beings who can understand and celebrate that without repackaging it and producing a bunch of bizarre derivations or cults or anything like that. We need liberty together. And by liberty, I don't just mean the freedom to explore and to pathfind and to return these faculties to our common experience together. I mean the liberty from packaging them, from deciding what they are for, and how they should be enacted, right? Should is the problematical word there. So I'm a little bit inspired this evening, and that's exciting. And I hope some of that enthusiasm comes across to my listeners and my viewers. And I'm just so grateful to have this chance with you this evening to remember together some of the lost potential of our lives and the urgencies in our hearts, the unspoken urgencies of our human hearts. So thank you. May we rediscover and remember them together. I look forward to learning together again sometime very soon. Bye-bye.